It started with a phone call I never should have answered. A familiar voice, one I hadn't heard in over a decade, cracking through the static with a simple request. Meet me, just once. I should have ignored it, should have deleted the message, tossed the burner phone into the nearest storm drain, and walked away. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. By the time I stepped into my car, the past had already tightened its grip around my throat. The meeting spot was an abandoned rest stop off Route 7, a place where deals were once made under the cover of night, now reduced to a haven for broken taillights and shattered beer bottles. He was waiting for me, leaning against the hood of an old sedan, looking just as tired as I felt. "I hear you're still in the business of saving lost causes," he said. "Guess that makes two of us." I didn't ask what he wanted. I didn't need to. We both knew that favors like this had a way of circling back at the worst possible moment. And as I drove away, gripping the wheel a little too tight, I realized this was one of those moments. The Last Stop Tavern stood at a lonely crossroads along the aging Route 7, right where 3 counties met, just beyond city jurisdiction. Regulars simply called it the Stop. With a steady stream of off-duty cops passing through, it had earned its reputation as a law enforcement hangout. Not the ideal spot for a clandestine meeting, which made it the perfect place for mine. The parking lot was nearly full when I pulled in. The bar was better stocked than most places, featuring a wide-open layout with plenty of seating. Being the last Friday of the month, it was busy but not overwhelming. Just the right balance, enough people to make my meeting with Sergeant Devin Cross look unplanned, but not so many that it would draw attention. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of the stairs. No surprise there. When you're the lawyer everyone believes eliminated his cheating wife and her cop boyfriend, you don't expect warm greetings. There had been no trial, no charges, hell, not even a body. The detective's car had disappeared along with the lovebirds, yet in everyone's mind, I was guilty. A motive? Sure. Proof? That was another thing altogether. Outside the courthouse, Devin had shown up, visibly irritated by my choice of meeting spot. He was a tall, solidly built black man, a straight arrow, a man who lived by his principles, the kind of guy who would rather die than owe someone like me. But debts had to be paid. I won't sugarcoat it. I'm not the kind of lawyer people call respectable. My name has surfaced in more than a few criminal cases, and my morals don't get in the way of my work. But once, just once, I did something good. Back in 2008, Devin had been drowning in a mortgage scheme. He was desperate, about to lose his house, out of legal options. The so-called honest attorneys had failed him, and as a last resort, he ended up in my office. I still don't know why I helped him. There was nothing in it for me. He was an honest cop, a devoted father to a sick daughter, and completely broke. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was seeing this strong, proud man crumbling under the weight of fear of telling his kids they'd be out on the street. So I did what I do best. First, I stalled the foreclosure by filing bankruptcy. Then I sent a few of my less law-abiding clients to have a little chat with the mortgage broker. A few conversations later, we had a confession. The whole thing was a scam. A strategically placed bribe sealed the deal, an amount the bank wasn't willing to counter. Devin kept his house. For once, real justice was served. But Devin never quite got over the fact that his family's home had been saved by a guy like me. "You really think this was the best place for a meeting?" he asked, unimpressed. "Even I have a conscience. I wasn't about to put you in damage's way just for talking to me." "And that's why we're here," he arched a brow just as Lottie, the bartender, came over. She wore her usual outfit, an impossibly tight crop top and jeans that fit like a second skin. Lottie was beautiful and never shy about flaunting it. "What's it going to be, Bruce?" she asked. Lottie and I had an old habit of exchanging flirtations and unsolicited advice. She was a single mom, no steady man, and a knack for falling for charm over reliability. I caught the brief hesitation in her stance. The whole town thought I was guilty, and guilt had a way of rubbing off. Yet, she still walked over instead of passing me off to another server. Turns out, I had more friends than I realized. But I wasn't about to let them suffer for it. "2 Boston Lagers, Lottie," I said. Devin shook his head. "You've got nerve, counselor. Showing up here where Paul Moreno's friends drink after their shifts." Paul Moreno, the man who seduced my wife and set off this whole damn nightmare. On the night of March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, he, his Ford GT, and my wife disappeared. That same evening, a storm drowned 3 counties, including Schoharie Creek. Out west, they'd call it a river. But here, people insisted it was a creek. That name had fooled plenty into underestimating it. Time and again, bridges, homes, and businesses were built too close. And time and again, the water reclaimed its own. By the time the floods receded, first responders had their hands full. 2 missing adulterers weren't exactly a priority. And when the dust settled, all eyes turned to me. "Takes guts to walk in here," I muttered. We talked about nothing for a while, keeping up appearances. When the beers arrived, I leaned in. "Just say what you need to, and I'll handle the rest. No one will ever trace it back to you." Devin hesitated, then spoke low. "There's a warrant. Sunday morning. 6 a.m. They're coming for your home and office." I shoved my chair back with force, making a scene. Devin flinched as I stood abruptly. "You listen to me," I shouted, making sure the whole room heard. "I don't take advice from subway rats. Hell, she'd be a better friend than you." I jabbed a finger toward Lottie. Then I turned and stormed out, leaving Devin sitting there, rattled but understanding. He was no fool. He'd catch on. To everyone else, it would look like a cop trying to get a confession out of me, not someone giving me a heads up. A private conversation could have put him under suspicion. A public blowout? That kept him clean. Stepping out into the cold night air, I took a slow, measured breath. This was my mess, my mistake. I'd let emotions cloud my judgment. Now, I had to fix it. Because justice, that's just another game. And if I wanted to win, I needed to play smarter than ever. Even now, the words from my late wife's journal clung to me, relentless, like a swarm of hornets. Each syllable another sting, each confession another wound. Elena Gray, Mrs. Bruce Gray. The entry from October 1st read, "I saw him again today. He's tall, striking, with thick black hair. Jenny says she knows him. In fact, she's slept with him. He's a cop, which means he's probably watching me. Something to do with Bruce. Hard to imagine why anyone would think Bruce is a threat. He's just a lawyer, but I suppose when you work with the kind of criminals he does, suspicion follows. Don't misunderstand. I love him. He's safe, steady, dependable. The kind of man you trust to be there. Why people assume he's dangerous, I'll never know. Jenny says this officer, Paul Moreno, is impressive. She's been seeing him for months behind her husband's back. Bob is just like Bruce, really. Solid, predictable, but dull. The only difference is Bob deals in real estate, while Bruce defends the kind of people that get their hands dirty. Jenny insists she just needed a little excitement. 15 years of marriage, a teenage daughter, and I feel like I should be knitting on a porch somewhere. Women like me don't catch the eye of young men anymore. It makes me feel ancient. October 15th. Bruce is out of town again. Lately, he's been gone more often than not. If it were anyone else, I'd suspect an affair. But Bruce? No. The man is as loyal as a golden retriever and just as predictable. I finally caved and joined the gym. Jenny pushed me into it. Fitness is her new obsession, and she wanted a workout buddy. I'm not exactly out of shape, at least not like Bruce, who's trying to fight off his midlife crisis. But I could use some tightening up. I've started running more, upped my morning jog from 1 mile to 2. But what I really need is to work on my stomach and my backside. Maybe it's just empty nest syndrome kicking in early. Maybe getting fit will help. Maybe I should have put up more of a fight when Rachel begged to go to boarding school. My 14-year-old daughter practically packed her own bags. I swear, she takes after my mother. Ambitious, focused, a little cold. Mom still thinks I wasted my potential becoming a social worker, but I believe in what I do. Helping people matters. Then again, maybe Rachel just wanted to get away from the stigma of Bruce's career. People talk, teenage girls listen. I get it, but that doesn't mean I don't miss her. I saw him again today. Paul, he was at my gym, and God, he looked good. That body, every inch of him sculpted like something out of a magazine. I tried not to stare, tried to avoid looking too closely at the tightness of his shorts, but Jesus, why is he still following me? I have no idea. But if I have to be watched, at least he's nice to look at. October 17th. Paul was there again today. This time he caught me staring. He didn't smirk, didn't call me out on it. Just met my eyes, steady, unwavering. I had to be the one to break the gaze first. Jenny swears he's interested in me, but I don't see why. Unless this is still about Bruce. I poured myself a glass of wine tonight, stretched out on the bed and tried to clear my mind. But it kept drifting back to Paul, his body, the way he moves. And God help me, what I know is beneath those gym shorts. I tried not to think about it. It felt disloyal to Bruce. But a fantasy isn't a crime. Everyone has fantasies, right? November 2nd. Went to vote today. Not that it'll change anything. As I walked out of the polling station, I saw Paul again. This time he wasn't even pretending to keep his distance. He wanted me to see him. And then he spoke. "Are you still spying on me?" I teased. He gave a small shrug. "It's my job. That's my excuse anyway." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse?" He smirked. "What if you were following me?" I'd say I didn't need an excuse. Exactly. So why do you need one? Have you looked in a mirror lately? I laughed. Oh, come on, I'm the mother of a teenager. That doesn't change anything. You're still gorgeous. The kind of woman younger men dream about. I rolled my eyes. Stop it, I'm an old woman. You're a mother, not old, just sexually confident. Before I could respond, I spotted someone I knew and ended the conversation fast. But the fact that he'd flirted with me openly, deliberately, left me reeling. I had dropped 5 kilos, toned up, but still. Someone like Paul interested in me? That was a thought worth holding on to. Maybe I'll get a personal trainer, really push myself. If I'm already catching his attention, imagine what I could do if I really tried. Bruce noticed, of course. This morning, 24 roses showed up at the house. When I called to ask why, he just said, "Because my wife is beautiful." What can you say about a man like that? I love him. I might be flirting with another man, but I would never betray my husband. I shut the diary. Then I reached for my phone. Jake picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Do you have any idea what time it is, counselor?" "I've been calling since 9. "I was working," Jake Trumbull muttered. "I've got another job for you." "Can it wait?" "No, immediate priority." A groggy sigh. "What now?" "By sunrise on Sunday, I need full blackout security at both my home and my office." "You're talking total coverage? That takes at least 72 hours. You're giving me, what, 24? "Just found out I need it." Another long pause. Then, "It's going to cost you." "How much? 35 grand? For all the business I've given you?" "That is the special price, Bruce. Anybody else, it'd be 50. I didn't argue. Couldn't. At this point, Jake could have named any price, and I'd have had to pay it. "Fine," I said. "Just get it done." November 9th. I'd run into Paul 3 times that week. Each time he smiled, gave a casual wave, like we shared some unspoken connection. Jenny, on the other hand, had taken things much further. She wasn't shy about the fact that she and Paul were sleeping together. According to her, he was the best she'd ever had. He was 29, 8 years younger than me. I asked her if he was really worth the risk, if an affair with him was worth shattering everything I'd built. She just smirked. "Ask me again after you've tried it." That night, when Bruce got home, I attacked him like I hadn't in years. The fact that our daughter was away at school had its advantages. Bruce was good. He always was. But I hated myself for the truth buried beneath my skin. The whole time I was thinking about Paul. Was I really that depraved? Was I the kind of woman who could only feel desire by picturing another man in her bed? Later that afternoon, I tried to clear my head, sipping a mocha latte at Starbucks, watching the world blur past. And then, just like that, Paul appeared, sliding into the seat across from me without an invitation. For a while, he didn't say a word. He just sat there, watching me, letting the silence weigh down the moment. Finally, he spoke. "They reassigned me," he said. I blinked. "What? I'm not your shadow anymore?" "And what does that mean, exactly?" He leaned forward, his voice slow, deliberate. "It means the department no longer sees you as a suspect. Whatever they think your husband's guilty of, they've decided you had no part in it." Then, without hesitation, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His grip was firm, steady, intentional. "But it also means," he continued, "that I can finally say what I've been wanting to say." I swallowed. "And what's that?" "That I like you, that I wish I could get to know you better." "Paul, I'm married." "So? And what exactly does a getting to know Mel, and what exactly does a getting to know me better mean?" He took my other hand in his, holding them both between his own. His touch was warm, sure of itself. "It means you're a beautiful woman, married to a man who doesn't satisfy you. You deserve more than that." "What about Jenny? I thought things were going well between you two." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Jenny and I were just physical. She's restless, bored in her marriage. But I want more than just sex. Do you really think any man would choose Jenny over you? The confidence in his voice made my stomach tighten. I told you. I've never cheated on my husband. Can he say the same? Bruce, you've seen him. What do you think? Paul squeezed my hand slightly. I think we both know you deserve better. I pulled away abruptly, stood up, left my coffee half drunk on the table. I needed to get out of there. This man had an effect on me that I didn't like, one I didn't trust. December 1st weeks passed, and I hadn't seen Paul again. I wasn't sure if that made me relieved or disappointed. The truth? I missed him. I craved his attention. The way he made me feel. Desirable. Wanted. I'd never been with another man besides Bruce, and curiosity is a dangerous thing. What would it be like to be with someone else? To be with someone like Paul, someone younger, stronger, more experienced? That night, as I walked to my car in the parking lot outside my office, I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned, and there he was. Paul, I gasped, my pulse jumping. You scared me half to end. What are you doing here? Are you stalking me now? He stepped closer, placing a firm hand on my waist beneath my open coat. I had to see you, he murmured. I think about you all the time. I should have been afraid, but the truth was, I thought about him too, constantly. Paul, please, I whispered. You have to leave me alone. I can't do this to my husband. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in and kissed me. It was intoxicating. The sheer force of him, the confidence, the hunger, and as cliché as it sounded, I felt it. The jolt of electricity, the fire igniting in my veins. I need you, he breathed against my lips. More than I've ever needed any woman, and you need me too. I can feel it, and God help me, I kissed him back. Then, just as quickly, I shoved him away, scrambling into my car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel. I can't, I whispered. I want to, but I can't. And then I drove away. Sunday morning, the raid. They didn't knock. At the crack of dawn, 4 officers in full tactical gear picked the lock and stormed inside. They probably thought they'd catch me asleep. Instead, I was in the kitchen, making breakfast, scrambling eggs in a cast-iron pan. The first officer burst in, tool drawn. Hope you like scrambled eggs, I said dryly. Before I could say another word, they grabbed me, hauled me outside, and shoved me into a police van. I sat there as they tore my house apart. They ripped up the carpets, dismantled the floorboards, dug through the garden beds. I was silently grateful I'd opted for mostly hardwood floors, less damage that way. The basement, however, was a different story. They destroyed it. Then worst of all, they broke into my car's trunk. The keys had been in the ignition. They could have just opened it, but no. They forced it open, bending the latch out of sheer malice. And for what? When they finally finished, a few officers I knew, guys I'd worked with before, decided to play friendly. They invited me to breakfast at Denny's. As I picked at my runny eggs, one of them leaned back in his chair and asked casually, So, Bruce, where are you hiding the bodies? I stabbed at my plate. From what I hear, there are no bodies. Come on, another cop chimed in. They vanished in March. It's December now. I looked out the window. Think it'll rain today? I asked. It's been dry since the summer storms, and now that they've wrecked my garden, I'll have to replant if I want any flowers in the spring. They weren't interested in the weather or my garden. They wanted one thing, my confession. Look, one of them said, lowering his voice. We get it. You had a damn good reason. Maybe you just lost your head. Stop being a lawyer for once and be a man. Own up to it and we can work something out. I smirked, sipping my coffee. No, I don't think it'll rain. Looks like a drought. Maybe I'll swing by Lowe's after this. Pick up some fresh bulbs? The officer sighed, tossing his napkin onto the table. Have it your way, lawyer. But you know how it goes in this state. Cop butchers get fried. Think about that. December 9th. Today was brutal. The call came in early. 5 children in immediate danger. I don't usually handle cases for Child Protective Services, but with the holidays approaching and half the department out sick, we were all pulling extra weight. 5 kids under 7, all needing urgent placement, was bad enough. But these kids had watched their mother get knocked nearly to end by the man they called Dad. Only 2 of them were biologically his, but that didn't matter. He was supposed to be their protector. Instead, he was their monster. I refused to let them be separated or dumped into a cold, impersonal county facility right before Christmas. But good foster homes don't appear out of thin air. By noon, I had a lead. An older couple in their 60s, recently retired, still full of energy, searching for a new sense of purpose. The wife was a retired nurse, the husband a former traffic engineer. By 4 p.m., they had been approved for emergency placement. The kids would have a safe home and, for the first time in their young lives, a sense of stability. I was feeling good about the outcome until the state police called. They weren't happy about the arrangement, bureaucratic nonsense, as usual, more concerned about policies than actual human lives. Can you believe they're worried about foster payments? I fumed to my coworker. Because the couple receives a state pension, the department is questioning if taking in foster children would be double dipping. For an hour, I fought the system, arguing my case to anyone who would listen. The debate made its way up to the district office, then to the state commissioner for DSS. Just when I thought I was hitting a dead end, my phone rang. "When are the kids coming?" The woman's voice was warm, full of anticipation. "We've got everything ready. Our daughters are here to help." I exhaled. "There's some debate over foster payments because of your pension." Her response was immediate, fiery. "Tell that idiot governor to keep his damn money. Just send us those children." The county executive laughed when I told her, "Screw the paperwork. Place the kids. If the state gives us trouble, we'll sue them later." By the time the children were settled, it was almost 8. I didn't make it home until 9. The first thing I did was take a long, hot shower. I considered calling Bruce. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. Other times he barely had a minute to spare. His clients weren't exactly 9 to 5 types. They were criminals with urgent needs. Usually, I let him be the one to call. But tonight, I wanted to hear his voice. I wrapped myself in a thick robe just about to dial when the doorbell rang. I hesitated, tightening the belt of my robe before cracking the door open on the chain. Paul stood on my doorstep, looking impossibly handsome and equally guilty. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I don't think that's a good idea. I know Bruce is out of town again. You're alone. All I'm asking for is a cup of coffee, just to talk." "I can't." "You can trust me. It's not you I don't trust. Please, just a few minutes." I don't know why, but I let him in. We sat on the couch with coffee, me keeping a deliberate distance at the far end. I adjusted my robe, suddenly hyper-aware of how little it covered. "Relax," he murmured. "I'm not here to take advantage of you. I just heard you had a rough day." I let out a breath. "Yeah." We talked. At first, I kept my guard up, but as the night wore on, it felt easy, familiar. Conversation flowed. We switched from coffee to wine, shared a frozen pizza. By midnight, the energy in the room had shifted. Paul's voice dropped lower, more intense. "Elaine, I will always be your friend, but you should know, I feel something for you, something deeper than I can explain." I stiffened. "Please," he continued, "just listen. Your husband is in New York right now, meeting with criminals and their tech specialists, figuring out how to beat the government's surveillance. These aren't just bad men. These are people who should be behind bars, and Bruce is helping them stay free." "Stop it!" I shook my head. "This isn't fair. He's not here to defend himself. You're loyal. I admire that. But is it fair to you? Elaine, I've watched you. I've seen how much you care, how much good you do. You're a saint married to the devil. Don't." My voice barely registered above a whisper. "I just want you to know I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Somehow we had moved closer. His fingertips brushed against my wrist. His warmth seeped through my skin. And before I realized what was happening, his hand slipped inside my robe. His touch sent a jolt through me, his lips finding mine. It was wrong, but I didn't stop him. For the first time in years, I felt something real, something raw. Every inch of my body responded. We both knew where this was leading, and neither of us wanted to stop. Then the phone rang. The sound shattered everything. It had been ringing for a while, and suddenly I knew exactly who it was. "Bruce!" I gasped, breaking away from Paul. I grabbed the phone, trying to steady my breath. "Just checking in," Bruce said. "Sorry if I woke you. I lost track of time." Paul exhaled, gave me a long, knowing look, then quietly stood and walked out the door. Bruce's call had saved me from making a mistake. But as I sat there, pulse still racing, I asked myself, did I want to be saved? The DA's office was as cold and uninviting as ever, with its outdated furniture and government-issued drabness. Chloe Marshall sat across from me, an ambitious woman riding the coattails of her father, a former senator who had avoided prosecution but kept enough power to land her this job. To her, I wasn't a lawyer. I was a criminal. "Where's your tool, Mr. Gray?" she asked. "We didn't find it during the search." I frowned. "Tool?" "A Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum, registered to you." "It's missing?" It wasn't in your house. So where is it? I leaned back. That's the first I'm hearing of it. It was in my nightstand. Are you telling me someone took it? Bruce, she sighed. Everything would go easier if you were honest. I smirked. Then let's start with you. What exactly did your officers recover from my home? Everything in due time. Then I'll answer in due time, I said, rising from my seat. She slid a document across the table. You're being summoned before a grand jury. I picked it up, unsurprised. I knew this was coming. The DA had no choice. They had my wife's diary. They knew everything, every secret, every betrayal, every truth I had been willing to ignore. And now they were going to use it to bury me. To someone like Chloe Marshall, the district attorney, this was a tragic love story. Two doomed lovers, sufferers of a cruel and vengeful husband. My perspective was a little different, but then so was my loss. Among the many things destroyed in the raid was Elaine's writing desk, a delicate antique from the late colonial era, narrow and elegant, a piece she had longed for when we were young. It had sat for months in the dusty front window of a small antique shop, a forgotten relic waiting for a home. Back then, we were newlyweds. Rachel was just learning to walk. Elaine was taking night classes, grinding through her master's degree in social work. I was a broke attorney trying to make a name for myself. And every time we passed that shop, she would pause, gaze at the desk through the glass, and sigh. I scraped together every spare dollar I could, determined to buy it for our anniversary. But when I finally walked into the store, ready to make the purchase, the desk was gone. I nearly walked out, heart sinking, until the clerk checked with the manager. It had been moved to the back. I had it delivered that evening. Elaine was ecstatic. I watched her sit at that desk over the years, writing letters, grading papers, filling out case notes. And every time I thought to myself, what a life we've built. Because love, I realized, wasn't grand gestures. It was moments. The way her face lit up when she unwrapped that desk, Rachel's first steps, our first home together, the pride in Elaine's voice when she finally earned her degree. Stack up enough of those moments and you have what people call love. Now that desk, the one that had meant everything to her, was in ruins. Smashed apart, drawers ripped open, violated like everything else in my home. They found the diary. I had expected them to. I could have left the drawers unlocked, let it sit there unnoticed. But locking them ensured they'd see it as something important. I needed them to take it. Still, seeing the desk in pieces made everything feel real. Elaine was lost to me. Just as I predicted, the diary's contents leaked immediately. It shattered the DA's office. Suddenly, the pressure on Chloe Marshall tripled. Now, she had more than just rumors. She had a narrative. Now, the world knew. Elaine and Paul Moreno weren't just an affair. They were Romeo and Juliet, and I was the villain of their love story. January 2nd. I can't seem to do this right, Elaine wrote. Jenny just laughs at me. Why are you overthinking this? She says. Bruce is out of town. No one knows anything. What's the problem? But how do I look Bruce in the eye again? No matter what people say about him, he's always been good to me. If he finds out, what do I say? Blame him, Jenny says. Tell him it's his fault for leaving you alone so often. He doesn't leave that often, I protested. And when we're together, we're fine. We have a good marriage. But Paul makes you feel something new, doesn't he? I didn't answer. Jenny just smiled knowingly. Bruce will never find out. And if he does, do what I did with Bob. What did you do? She smirked. Remember when Bob looked so upset that weekend we all went away? Yeah? That's because he had just found out about Paul. I told him the truth, that I still loved him, but that it didn't change anything, that Paul was different, that some men just know how to make a woman feel alive. I stared at her. You're lucky Bob didn't own a tool. Jenny shrugged. Somehow, I think Bruce will understand, just like Bob did. I've seen Paul half a dozen times in the last few weeks, always in public, never alone. But he watches me, watches Bruce. Bruce has been home, attentive. We've made love almost every night. I should be happy. I should be satisfied. But I'm not. Because in those moments, I'm not thinking about Bruce. I'm thinking about Paul. Today, Paul slipped me a note, an address, a date, a time. It has to be his apartment. The date, the day Bruce leaves for New York? I don't want to go. But I know I will. I tell myself it's just to ask him to stop. January 15th. Oh God, what have I done? I went to Paul's apartment. I told myself nothing would happen, that I would be strong, that I couldn't betray my husband. Then he kissed me, and suddenly none of that mattered. He guided me into his bedroom, his fingers gently undoing the buttons of my blouse until it slipped from my shoulders. His hands traced a slow path down my arms, meeting my wrists as he leaned in, his lips pressing firmly against mine. His fingers traced my skin, setting me on fire. He was still fully dressed, and then, just like that, he wasn't. His body was magnificent. He had incredible endurance. We didn't stop, not for hours. By the time I left, the sun had set. I walked out of his apartment knowing I would come back. Chloe Marshall's opening statement was colder than usual. That meant one thing. It wasn't hers. It was good. That meant someone else wrote it. Silva Marks, the district attorney himself, sat beside her. He wasn't about to let his underling take all the credit. But he sure as hell wasn't going to do the hard work himself either. I was defending myself. Presiding Judge Bascom raised an eyebrow. A lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. Better than having a fool for a lawyer, I replied. Bascom didn't laugh. He was going to make sure justice prevailed. And by justice, he meant my conviction. Judge Bascom would do whatever it took to push a weak case toward conviction. When it came time for jury instructions, he'd twist reasonable doubt into a warped version of guilty until proven innocent. But I wasn't worried. Not yet. I was just waiting for the right moment to play my trump card. I had the truth on my side. But the prosecution had something far more powerful. A story. A tragic, illicit romance. The honorable cop and the selfless social worker. Two souls meant to be together. And me? I was the villain. Guilt or innocence didn't matter, because justice rarely has anything to do with the courtroom. Sergeant McVeigh, did you open the trunk of the defendant's vehicle? Chloe Marshall asked, leading her first witness. Yes, McVeigh responded. The car immediately raised red flags. It was an older model, a brown Toyota Camry. Not exactly the type of car you'd expect a high-priced defense lawyer to drive, but it was discreet, and conveniently had a spacious trunk. Chloe turned to the jury with a knowing smile, silently feeding into their suspicions. See how clever the defendant is? And what did you find in the trunk? It had been recently cleaned, but we recovered hair and fiber samples consistent with both Officer Paul Moreno and Elaine Gray. So their bodies could have been transported in that trunk? I shot up. Objection calls for speculation. Overruled, Bascom said without hesitation. The witness is an expert. He may answer. And so McVeigh spun his theory. He detailed, step by step, how he believed I had transported and disposed of the bodies. Every word dripped with certainty. When it was my turn to cross-examine, I leaned in. Sergeant, if my car was used to move the bodies, then tell me, where is Paul Moreno's bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500? McVeigh frowned. I'm not sure I follow. Paul's car, I repeated. It's missing, isn't it? McVeigh hesitated. I don't have that information. But you do know it hasn't been found. I turned toward the jury. And we're not talking about a generic, forgettable sedan here. This is a custom-painted Mustang Shelby GT 500, a car that would stand out anywhere, and yet it's vanished without a trace. McVeigh cleared his throat. No, Paul's vehicle has not been recovered. Now back to my Camry, I continued. Your team forcibly entered the vehicle, correct? Why didn't you just use the keys? They were in the ignition. A pause. Maybe we overlooked them, McVeigh muttered. Overlooked them? I raised an eyebrow. And yet, you used those same keys to open the trunk, didn't you? McVeigh's face twisted in confusion. Before he could answer, Chloe was already on her feet. Objection! Argumentative. Assumes facts not in evidence. Of course, facts weren't Chloe's concern. She just wanted a conviction. After McVeigh, the prosecution called senior investigator Kim Eng. He gave a gripping account of how his team tore up the carpet in my basement and found traces of blood beneath it. Were you able to confirm the blood's DNA? Chloe asked solemnly. No, the sample was too degraded. But you found traces of bleach in the basement, correct? Yes. A heavy smell of bleach, which strongly suggests an attempt to destroy evidence. Chloe's voice lowered. Bleach is often used to clean up crime scenes, isn't it? Yes. When it was my turn, I didn't have to say much. Investigator Eng, is there a laundry room in my basement? Yes. And would you typically expect to find bleach in a laundry room? A long pause. That depends on the preferences of the person doing the laundry. I didn't need to say anything else. The 7 women on the jury exchanged knowing glances, because they all knew what Kim Eng didn't want to admit. Then came the real show. The prosecution began reading from Elaine's diary, January 16th. I feel guilty and weightless at the same time. I can't stop thinking about Paul, his incredible body, the way he makes me feel. And yet, I feel so ashamed when I think about Bruce. I want to believe the worst about him, because if he really is the monster people whisper about, then maybe my betrayal isn't so unforgivable. But I know better. Bruce has always loved me, and I repaid him in the worst way possible. I can't shake this feeling that he knows, that just by looking at me, he can see it written all over my face. I'm writing this at my desk, the desk Bruce bought me back when we had nothing, a real antique. I saw it in a shop window once, admired it from a distance, knowing we could never afford it. Back then, money was tight. I wanted a child so badly. We had only just gotten married, and I made the choice. I stopped taking birth control. It should have been a decision we made together, but I took it upon myself. Bruce never made me feel guilty. Even when things were hard, even when money ran out, he only worried about how to take care of us. And yet, despite everything, he still managed to buy me that desk. My husband, my best friend, the man I have betrayed. I don't know what to do. I keep telling myself I should never see Paul again, but then I picture running straight into his arms. Bruce is coming home tonight. Maybe he already knows. Maybe this will be the end of it, one way or another. January 17th. Nothing happened last night. If Bruce suspected anything, he didn't show it, and yet something feels different. There's distance between us now. Maybe it's all in my head. Maybe I'm imagining the very thing I fear. Bruce seemed tired. For now, I'll wait and see. I left early for work to avoid facing him in the morning light. I had barely arrived when my phone rang. It was Paul. He wanted to talk. And we did, until I absolutely had to start my shift. Hearing his voice lifted me, made me believe everything would work out, that love would find a way. And I have to admit it now. What I feel for Paul is love. Maybe not the kind I had with Bruce, but something deeper, more passionate, more consuming, something I've never felt before. January 19th. I slipped away for an extended lunch to meet Paul at his apartment. He works the late shift, 4 to midnight. We had 2 perfect hours together. When I got home, Bruce barely reacted, or maybe I'm imagining that. Maybe I just feel guilty. We haven't been intimate since he got back from New York, but he'll be home this weekend. I'll make it up to him. February 12th. The last month has been a whirlwind. Paul and I meet at his place at least twice a week now, during the day and at night when Bruce is away, which is happening more and more often. Paul says Bruce is involved with dangerous people. The FBI has been watching, but every attempt to surveil him has failed. He's too smart, too careful. He blocks their warrants, helps criminals secure top-of-the-line anti-surveillance tech, things that are barely legal but easy to obtain with the right permits. Paul doesn't say it outright, but I know. He's still tracking Bruce, still watching him. That should comfort me, should make me feel safer. But instead I feel trapped. I love them both. But they're on opposite sides, and I don't see a way out. Bruce has been perfect lately. Thoughtful, affectionate, leaving me little gifts, sending flowers, making love to me. But something feels off. He hasn't said a word, hasn't hinted that he knows. But after 15 years, I can sense it. He's worried. Something is gnawing at him. The diary as evidence. Forgive me, Mr. Gray, but I don't see any reason why your wife's diary shouldn't be admitted as evidence, Judge Bascom said, his tone flat, indifferent. We were in his chambers, arguing over the prosecution's motion to introduce the diary. Hearsay doesn't concern you? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. It was an out-of-court statement, being used as proof of my guilt. Classic hearsay. Chloe gave a careless shrug. There are exceptions. Which ones? She smirked. A few. She didn't bother elaborating. I knew I wouldn't win this fight. Chloe was convinced the diary was her golden ticket to a conviction, and Bascom was all too happy to hand it to her. It's admitted, he said, dismissing me with a wave. If I'm wrong, you can appeal. But appeals wouldn't matter. The prosecution would argue that admitting the diary was a harmless error, and once you're convicted, no judge overturns a case over something like that. Chloe didn't read the diary aloud herself. She chose someone younger, a paralegal from her office. Mid-20s, brown eyes, soft features, with just the right touch of innocence to make Elaine's words sound even more tragic. She even blushed at the more intimate passages. The jury ate it up. Elaine's affair wasn't scandalous, it wasn't selfish, it was heartbreaking. March 16th. Rachel came home for spring break. I haven't seen or spoken to my daughter since Christmas. She seems happy, but I still don't understand why she insisted on going to boarding school. I suspect it has to do with the rumors about Bruce. She loves him, but that doesn't mean she can escape the whispers, and for a teenage girl, that must be impossible. With Rachel home, Paul and I can't meet at my house, and Paul is starting to worry that some of his colleagues are suspicious. If they find out about us while he's still investigating Bruce, it could ruin him. Paul wants to request a transfer. He wants me to leave Bruce. But now that the moment is here, I finally see how wrong it is. What I'm doing to Paul is cruel. This entire affair is wrong, and seeing Rachel again only solidified it. I'm her mother. I'm Bruce's wife. Neither of them deserves this pain. The pain I would cause them would be far worse than the pain I will feel letting Paul go. For the first time, I can see clearly. This passion, this obsession, it's blinded me. Tomorrow, I'll tell Paul. It will be painful, but he will move on. He won't be alone for long. Jenny has been waiting. She's younger, beautiful. And Bob, well, he doesn't have a choice. A man like Bob can't do anything to a man like Paul. And yet everyone insists Bruce isn't that kind of man either. Would Bruce hurt Paul if he knew? I don't believe he would ever hurt me. But what if I'm wrong? People say terrible things about Bruce, things that can't be true. I've loved him for too long, known him for too long, and yet there's doubt. Paul is convinced Bruce is dangerous, that I should be afraid. But when I look at my husband, I see the same man I married, the kind man, the devoted father, the man who, through everything, put Rachel and me first. Tomorrow I will end it. It will hurt, but I have to do the right thing. I called Jenny tonight and told her that the day after tomorrow she should call Paul. He'll need someone to comfort him. The young paralegal closed the diary, blinking at the jury with a soft, sorrowful expression. It was scripted. Every moment calculated to shape their perception, to cement the idea that Elaine and Paul had been tragic lovers, and that I was the monster standing in their way. But as I listened to Elaine's own words, I didn't hear a love story. I heard regret. Elaine chose her family. She realized Paul was a manipulator, that he had pursued her despite knowing she was married, that he had stalked her, that she had made a terrible mistake, and that Bruce, her husband, wasn't the villain Paul made him out to be. Maybe Paul truly believed the rumors. Maybe he thought he was saving Elaine. Maybe. But in the end, they waited too long, and they met a terrible fate. If Elaine had come clean, if she had ended things with Paul sooner, would any of this have happened? I didn't have the luxury of dwelling on what-ifs. Right now, my focus was survival. After the diary, the jury had already made up their minds. I could feel it. The whole courtroom could feel it. I had a long list of witnesses lined up, but in reality, only one mattered. Jake Trumbull. To the jury, he appeared to be just another expert witness. His testimony came with a 500-page report filled with complicated jargon, but buried deep within it, on page 439, was the only thing that mattered. A single reference to video surveillance. We started with his credentials. Degree in electrical engineering from RIT, served in Army intelligence, spent 2 decades in the FBI. Not a bad resume. What I didn't mention, after leaving the FBI, he had switched sides. The same criminals he once investigated, he now worked for them. Jake Trumbull was an expert in counter-surveillance, and right now, he was my expert. Mr. Trumbull, have you done any work for me in the past? Yes, many times. What was the last job you did for me? I installed a full-scale security system at your home and office, every room, every angle, inside and out. And what do you call this system? We call it black cover. It's designed to uncover dirty deeds. Define dirty deeds. Unauthorized entry, planting of evidence, illegal surveillance. And did you find any dirty deeds in my case? Trumbull nodded. Yes. My team and I recorded Sergeant McVeigh removing the keys from your Toyota Camry and opening the trunk. We then watched as he emptied a bag of fibers and debris into it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. A short time later, Trumbull continued, he returned with a team, broke the trunk open with a crowbar, and discovered the very evidence he had planted. The jury sat in stunned silence. Chloe Marshall immediately objected, but the judge overruled her. Trumbull was just getting started. With the judge's approval, we played the footage. The courtroom watched in real time as Sergeant McVeigh framed me. Every accusation, every so-called trace fiber and damning evidence wasn't found. It was placed. Then Trumbull turned his attention to the basement. Investigator Eng claimed to have found blood, he said, but we also captured footage of an officer entering the property carrying a vial of liquid. Moments later, he discovered the blood evidence that conveniently supported the prosecution's case. With no confirmed DNA match, the entire case collapsed. No bodies, no homicide weapon, no proof that a crime had even been committed. All they had was a missing detective, a missing woman, and a missing car. And suddenly that wasn't enough. The jury didn't need long. Not guilty. The moment the words left the foreman's mouth, Rachel threw her arms around me. She had never doubted me. That meant something. Others, though, they thought I had gotten away with homicide. No officers were punished. No charges were filed against the men who tried to frame me. And in the end, they had actually done me a favor. Had they been patient? Had they waited for real evidence? They would have found it, because nature has its own way of revealing the truth. The long, dry summer turned Schoharie Creek into little more than a trickle, and with it unearthed a buried secret. Paul Moreno's car, a bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500, once swallowed by floodwaters, now lodged in the riverbed. The bodies were still inside. The currents had dragged the car miles downstream, but the frame had kept them trapped within. Inside, they found Elaine's purse. And next to it, her body. Elaine had been right. I had been suspicious. I had collected proof of her affair. I had been devastated. But I had planned a divorce, not a homicide. The police would never believe that, because now they had evidence. Elaine and Paul's bodies were found together. Neither was fully clothed. The autopsy confirmed it. They had been shot mid-closeness. Paul had been the target. The bullets had passed through him and into Elaine. On the Mustang's floor, they found it, registered to me, the very tool that had vanished from my home. Had the police and prosecution been patient, they wouldn't have needed to plant evidence. The truth would have come out on its own. But the diary forced their hand. It had painted Elaine and Paul as star-crossed lovers, cruelly torn apart by a jealous, vengeful husband. The DA had to act. Public opinion had to be satisfied. So they rushed to put me away, and in doing so, they handed me my freedom. The police hated me. The public was divided. But in my world, winning was everything. I had knocked them. I was untouchable. The cops would never forgive me. But my new clients? They saw my acquittal as proof that I was the best damn lawyer in the business. I raised my rates, hired a new associate, young, talented, untainted by scandal. And just like that, I was back, bigger than ever. Lottie slid a beer across the bar and gave me a knowing smile. She didn't need to say she supported me. She showed it. We were at Chambers, a new spot in town. She had left Falcon's Rest, and out of loyalty, I followed. The regulars here, they respected a man who fought the system and won. And that's exactly what I had done. They called me an anti-hero. Chloe Marshall wasn't as lucky as I was. When the dust settled, someone had to take the fall. She became the scapegoat for the botched prosecution and was forced to resign in disgrace. Meanwhile, I sat across from Bob at a quiet bar, watching him take a long, slow sip of his Sam Adams. "Take your time," I said. "No rush. I don't have a wife waiting for me at home. And let's be honest, yours isn't exactly worth rushing back to." His frown was slight but telling. I think he was finally realizing that some women aren't worth the trouble, no matter how beautiful they are. Jenny, his wife, was proof of that. "I'm sorry about all of it," he started, then let the sentence die in the air. I waved him off. At this point, an apology is just noise. "I never wanted Elaine to get hurt," he said, almost pleading. "Of course not, just a tragic accident, right?" I smirked. "You're not exactly a tool expert. How could you have known the bullets would pass through Paul and kick her?" Bob's hand shook slightly as he set his beer down. Exactly. His seats, they leaned back all the way like a damn bed. I couldn't even see who was underneath him. And I was so angry after Jenny told me she was seeing him again. "Right," I said smoothly. "You were practically blacked out with rage, barely aware of what you were doing." Bob latched onto the excuse like a drowning man clinging to a lifeboat. "Yes! I didn't plan this. I just wanted to scare him. I stole your tool earlier, but only because I knew where you kept it. In your bedroom, right? For protection?" "That's right." I nodded. "A gift from a client. I kept it there for Elaine's safety when I was away." Bob's face twisted as the irony hit him. She told me she was meeting him again, he muttered. Right. Paul will need some comforting, she said. Bob clenched his jaw. Regret was sinking in. I couldn't just sit back and let it happen, he whispered. So I went to his house to confront him, to tell him I wouldn't tolerate it. But when I got there, his car was already gone. I rang the bell. No answer. So you jumped to the worst conclusion, I said, voice calm. A reasonable mistake, given the circumstances. Bob nodded, almost relieved to hear me justify it. I knew where he took his women. That disgusting car of his. Everyone knew. He always parked near the creek. Private, secluded. By the time I got there, it was already raining. Dark as hell. I pulled over, walked toward the water. On a good night, the moon would flood the whole place with silver light. But that night, the storm had rolled in. They were on the passenger side, but the driver's window was cracked just enough. I could hear them laughing, and then she moaned. It felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't think. I didn't process. Bob swallowed. I just pulled the trigger. The tool slipped from my hand. Or maybe I threw it. I don't even know. And I had no idea Elaine was in the car. Bob sat across from me, fingers white-knuckled around his beer. I'm so sorry, he whispered. Are you going to tell the police? His voice was small, brittle. I shrugged. Why would I? His eyes darted up, desperate. I eliminated your wife. Yes, but not on purpose. Bob's breath shuddered out of him. I don't even know how the car ended up in the creek. I thought it would be found immediately, but when it wasn't, people started blaming you. Of course they did. I swirled my drink. No bodies, no weapon. The case against me was built on assumptions. Bob stared down at the table. But you knew. I had a damn good suspicion. You knew exactly where Elaine had been that night. I nodded. I put a GPS tracker in her purse. When she disappeared, I checked the last location before the signal was lost. When the car never turned up, I figured the floodwaters must have carried it downstream. Once it filled with water, it sank. I knew it was only a matter of time before the creek gave up its secrets. Bob exhaled shakily. So you knew. And you knew it was me. Not for certain, but I had a feeling. I regret it, he said, his voice raw. And I hate that people still think you did it. He looked up, eyes searching mine. You have to turn me in, I sighed. Bob, people believe what they want to believe. And honestly, I'm not in the business of trading ugly truths for pretty lies. So, you're letting me go? You're safe, from me anyway. Bob's shoulder sagged as relief hit him. Then why did you invite me here? I reached into my jacket and slid a folded document across the table. Bob frowned as he picked it up. What's this? My bill? His eyes widened. Your what? Bob, I put on a damn good defense, the best money could buy. But you defended yourself. Whose fault is that? I asked with a smirk. I spent months proving my innocence, dismantling a case that you caused. Someone has to pay for that. And, I might add, I tapped the paper. I did a flawless job. Bob blinked at the dollar amount on the invoice. That's a lot. That's how good I am. His lips pressed into a thin line. Do you take American Express? Naturally. I think Bob felt relieved more than anything. I wasn't turning him in. I wasn't going to be his judge, jury, or executioner. But I also wasn't letting him off for free. We live in a world where the presumption of innocence is a joke. People are judged by headlines, not evidence. And in a system that's broken, a man has to live by his own rules. Bob left. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I picked up my beer just as Lottie slid another fresh one in front of me. You okay? She asked, her voice gentle. I took a slow sip. Yeah, I said. In the end, everything works out for the better.